$75,000. That was the number printed on the check Marcus Ashford slid across his mahogany desk, the paper making a sound like something tearing as it moved toward the woman standing on the other side. Vivian Reed stared at the check without touching it. Her hands remained pressed against the silk of her dress, midnight blue, his favorite color, the same shade she had worn the first time he kissed her at a company gala 3 years ago. This should cover everything. His voice carried no tenderness. I have the name of a clinic in another state. Very private. Very professional. You can be there and back within a week, and no one needs to know this happened. She had rehearsed this moment for 3 weeks. Since the doctor's confirmation. Since the 2 pink lines appeared on the pharmacy test she had taken in a gas station bathroom because she could not bring herself to do it at home. She had imagined his face softening. She had imagined him pulling her close the way he did after they made love in his penthouse apartment, when he whispered that she was the only person who truly understood him. But Marcus Ashford was not softening. He stood behind his desk with the rigid posture of a man delivering a termination notice, his silver-touched hair immaculate, his expression holding the same cold precision he used when dismissing underperforming executives. I am keeping the baby. The words came out steadier than she expected. Something flickered across his face, surprise perhaps, or irritation, and then it was gone, replaced by something harder, something that made her instinctively step backward. Welcome back to another powerful story, my beloved listeners. Kindly tell me where you are watching from and what time it is where you are at. If you are new here, prepare for a story of betrayal, unexpected love, and what truly makes a family. Drop everything and listen closely. This tale of heartbreak and redemption might just change how you view love and family forever. The city stretched below them through floor-to-ceiling windows, 40 stories of glass and steel separating them from the ordinary world where ordinary people made ordinary decisions. Up here, in the corner office of Ashford Holdings, the rules were different. Up here, problems were managed, complications were eliminated, and inconvenient truths were buried beneath enough money to ensure permanent silence. You are not thinking clearly. Marcus moved around the desk with the controlled grace of someone accustomed to commanding attention. His presence filled the space until Vivian could barely breathe. The board meeting is next month. They are finalizing my contract extension. 5 more years as CEO, the largest expansion in company history. My wedding to Victoria is in 5 weeks. Her family controls 3 of the 7 board seats. If you keep this child, if anyone discovers what happened between us, everything I have spent 20 years building collapses. Vivian felt something crack inside her chest. A clean break that would never heal properly no matter how much time passed. She had known about Victoria, had known about the engagement that Marcus promised meant nothing beyond business strategy, had believed him when he said he was only marrying her for the board seats her family controlled. She had convinced herself that love mattered more than timing, that eventually he would choose authenticity over ambition. But standing there with his check between them, she finally understood that she had been a convenience. Something warm and willing to fill his empty hours while he built his empire on someone else's foundation. So you are asking me to choose your career over our child. I am telling you what will happen if you do not. Something in his tone made her blood run cold. Your mother works housekeeping at the Grand Metropolitan, does she not? Head of evening shift. 23 years of service. It would be unfortunate if questions arose about missing inventory, unexplained discrepancies. A single investigation could cost her not just her position but her reputation. And your brother, the one with cerebral palsy who finally got that data entry position at our subsidiary. One conversation with his supervisor and that position disappears. Vivian stared at him, watching the man she loved threaten her family with the casual efficiency of someone scheduling a meeting. She thought about her mother, who had worked double shifts to put her through community college, who had cried with joy when Vivian landed this executive assistant position at the most prestigious investment firm in the city. She thought about her brother James, who had struggled for years to find work that accommodated his disability, who had finally found dignity and independence in a job that Marcus could eliminate with a single phone call. He was offering her a choice that was not really a choice at all. Backing her into a corner with precision. Take the check, Vivian. His hand reached out to touch her face with gentleness that felt like mockery. Go to the clinic. In a few months, this will all feel like a bad dream. I cannot give you what you want. I cannot be the man you need me to be. But I can make sure you are taken care of financially. That has to be enough. She looked at him for a long moment, memorizing the planes of his face. The grey at his temples. The small scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood accident he had told her about one night when they lay tangled together in sheets that cost more than her monthly rent. She had loved this man. Had given him 18 months of her life, her ideas, her body, her belief that he was different from the cold reputation that preceded him. Okay. She picked up the check. I will handle it. The relief that flooded his expression made her stomach turn. But she kept her face blank as she walked toward the door. His hand caught her wrist, pulling her back for one last kiss that tasted like goodbye and lies. I am sorry. He whispered against her lips. I wish things could be different. So do I, Vivian replied. And she meant it in ways he would never understand. She left his office with the check clutched against her chest. Rode the elevator down through 40 floors of his glass tower. Walked out into night air that felt too cold for September. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother asking if she wanted dinner, and Vivian had to lean against a street lamp to keep from collapsing. The walk to her apartment took 40 minutes. She could have taken a taxi, but she needed the time, needed the rhythm of her feet against pavement to help her think. By the time she reached her building, a modest 6-story walk-up in a neighborhood Marcus had never visited, she had made her decision. She would not comply. But she would not fight openly either. She would disappear so completely that Marcus would have no reason to follow through on his threats. Her family would be confused. They would demand explanations. But Vivian could not tell them the truth without putting them at risk. She began packing with mechanical efficiency, her hands moving without conscious thought, folding clothes into suitcases, wrapping photographs in newspaper, taking apart the life she had built piece by piece. She booked a bus ticket using her credit card, knowing she would max it out but not caring, knowing only that she needed to be somewhere Marcus could not find her. She was nearly finished when her apartment door shuddered under 3 sharp knocks. Vivian froze. It was past 11. No one visited this late without calling first. She moved to the peephole and felt her heart stop at the sight of the man standing in her hallway. She recognized him from engagement photographs. Daniel Langley. Victoria's older brother. Tall and broad with a kind of face that looked friendly in photographs but held something calculating around the edges. He was the one who handled problems too complicated for their father's public image. He knocked again, harder, and when she did not answer, his voice filtered through with practiced charm. Miss Reed. I just want to talk for a moment. No need to be frightened. Every instinct screamed at her to stay silent. But before she could move away, she heard metal scraping against the lock. He was picking it. Actually breaking in. Vivian stumbled backward, reaching for her phone. The door swung open and he filled the frame. His smile never wavered. You are making a mistake, he said conversationally, stepping inside. My sister's wedding cannot have complications. Our family has invested considerable resources positioning Marcus Ashford as the ideal partner for Victoria's future. She is not marrying him for love, Miss Reed. She is marrying him because his company complements ours perfectly. Because together they create a dynasty that will dominate their sector for generations. You and your pregnancy represent a threat to years of careful planning. Get out, Vivian said. But her voice came out thin and terrified. Victoria knows about you. Daniel continued, his tone almost casual. Marcus's pathetic attempt at discretion fooled no one. But Victoria does not care about his affair. She cares about timing and optics. A pregnant mistress surfacing 5 weeks before the wedding creates precisely the kind of scandal that could spook nervous board members. Could make our family look weak and unprepared. So Marcus gave you money, which was generous. But you are still here. Still pregnant. Still a problem that needs resolving. Vivian tried to run for her bedroom. Tried to lock herself inside. But he was faster and stronger. She fought. Screamed. Felt her body slam against furniture. Felt pain explode through her skull when her head connected with the edge of her coffee table. The world tilted sideways. Darkness crept in at the edges of her vision. And the last thing she saw before consciousness left her was Daniel Langley straightening his jacket like nothing had happened. When Vivian woke, she was in a hospital bed. A kind nurse was checking her vitals. Explaining that a neighbor had heard the commotion and called for help. Explaining that Vivian had been unconscious for several hours. Asking gentle questions about what had happened. I fell. Vivian said. Her voice was hoarse. Unfamiliar. I was clumsy. Tripped over a box I was packing. The nurse did not look convinced. But she did not push. Vivian submitted to examination. Listened to the doctor explain she had a mild concussion and significant bruising. Felt relief so overwhelming she nearly wept when they confirmed her pregnancy was still viable. The baby had survived. Despite everything, the baby had survived. But when they left her alone in that sterile room, Vivian made a decision that would reshape everything. She could stay and fight. Or she could disappear so completely that neither Marcus nor Victoria's family would ever find her. She chose survival. Chose her daughter's future over justice. And when she walked out of that hospital the next morning against medical advice, Vivian Reed ceased to exist in every way that mattered. The woman who boarded a bus that afternoon carried identification in a different name. Her grandmother's maiden name. Vivian Mercer. She carried nothing else except Marcus Ashford's blood money and fierce determination to turn his cruelty into something he could never destroy. 3 weeks later, Marcus Ashford married Victoria Langley in a ceremony covered by 4 national newspapers. The photograph showed him looking distinguished and satisfied, his bride elegant in a gown that cost more than most people earned in a year. He stood at the altar watching Victoria walk down an aisle decorated with white roses that required a second mortgage's worth of flowers. She was beautiful in the calculated way of women who understood appearance was currency. Her smile was perfect for the cameras documenting their union. They signed papers that bound their companies together more thoroughly than any vows could bind their hearts. And when he kissed her in front of 500 witnesses, Marcus felt nothing except the faint relief of someone who had successfully avoided disaster. He told himself this was enough. Told himself that marriage was a business arrangement and expecting more was naive. Told himself that the hollow feeling in his chest would fade once the merger was complete and his position was secure. The marriage settled into a rhythm of polite distance. Separate bedrooms in their penthouse apartment. Carefully coordinated public appearances where they played their roles with practiced ease. Victoria never asked about his late nights at the office. Never questioned the shadows under his eyes or the way he sometimes stood at windows staring at nothing. She had gotten what she wanted. A powerful husband to complement her family's influence. Access to board seats that would let her expand her own ambitions. Marcus had gotten his contract extension and his expansion budget. It was enough. He told himself this constantly. It had to be enough. But late at night, when sleep would not come, he thought about Vivian in the fragmented way of someone trying to remember a dream. He had tried to find her in those first weeks after she disappeared. Called her disconnected number. Went to her apartment and found it empty with no forwarding address. Her mother claimed ignorance with tears in her eyes. Her brother had threatened to break Marcus's jaw if he came around again. And eventually Marcus stopped looking because what was the point? She had taken his money and solved the problem. Had done exactly what he demanded. And if some small part of him wondered whether she had actually gone through with the termination, or if somewhere in the world his child existed, he buried that question under layers of work and ambition and the relentless forward momentum of building his empire. Vivian, meanwhile, was learning what survival actually cost. The bus had taken her to a small coastal town 3 states away. A place where nobody recognized the Ashford name or cared about New York business dealings. She rented a room above a bakery from an elderly woman named Eleanor who asked no questions and charged minimal rent. The pregnancy was difficult. She developed complications in the 6th month that required bed rest she could not afford. The blood money from Marcus dwindled faster than she expected. Medical bills. Rent. Groceries. The small necessities of building a life from nothing. She found work where she could. Waitressing at a diner where the owner paid cash and did not ask about her past. Teaching piano lessons to children whose parents paid whatever they could manage. Transcribing documents for a local church choir whose director took pity on the quiet pregnant woman who appeared at services without ever explaining where she came from. Her daughter arrived 3 weeks early. In a hospital where no one held Vivian's hand during 16 hours of labor. Where she screamed through contractions alone in a room that smelled of antiseptic and fear. Where she finally pushed her child into the world at 3 in the morning while a tired nurse coached her through the final stages. They placed the baby on her chest. A small warm weight with dark hair and lungs strong enough to announce her presence to the entire maternity ward. Vivian looked at her daughter through tears she did not try to hide. Traced the curve of her cheek. Counted her fingers. watched her tiny mouth search for comfort. "Sophie," she whispered. "Your name is Sophie. It means wisdom. And you are going to be so much wiser than I ever was." In that moment, holding her daughter for the first time, Vivian understood that everything she had endured was worth it. The threats, the violence, the months of poverty and fear, all of it had led to this small perfect person who would never know hunger the way Vivian had known it, who would never doubt her own value the way Vivian had doubted hers. She made silent promises to her daughter in that hospital room. Promises about safety and education and a life built on truth rather than convenience. Promises about never letting anyone make Sophie feel like a problem to be solved. The first year was the hardest. Marcus's money ran out before Sophie was 6 months old. Vivian worked double shifts at the diner while a teenage neighbor watched the baby for whatever Vivian could pay. She learned to stretch food, learned to find clothes at thrift stores, learned to accept help from the bakery owner Eleanor, who seemed to understand without being told that Vivian was running from something she could not name. Eleanor was 73 years old and had outlived 2 husbands and all her children. She had opinions about everything and shared them freely, but she never once asked Vivian to explain her circumstances. Instead, she simply appeared with casseroles when Vivian was too exhausted to cook. Babysat Sophie without being asked. Slipped $20 bills into Vivian's coat pocket and pretended not to know anything about it when confronted. "You remind me of myself," Eleanor said one evening, watching Vivian feed Sophie in the small apartment above the bakery. "When I was your age, I made choices that cost me everything I thought I wanted. Took me years to understand that what I lost was not worth keeping and what I found was worth everything." Vivian did not ask what Eleanor had lost. Some stories revealed themselves in their own time. She focused instead on survival, on building a life one small piece at a time. She took classes at the community library on bookkeeping and accounting, subjects that had always made sense to her analytical mind. She offered to help local businesses with their finances in exchange for whatever they could pay. She built a reputation, slowly, as someone reliable and competent and honest. And she watched her daughter grow. Sophie's first word was "Mama," spoken at 11 months while reaching for Vivian's face. Her first steps came at 13 months, unsteady and determined, across the bakery floor while Eleanor cheered from behind the counter. Her first complete sentence was "I love you, Mama," delivered at bedtime when she was 2 years old, her small arms wrapped around Vivian's neck with the fierce possession of a child who had never known uncertainty about her mother's devotion. These were the moments Vivian held on to. The moments that made the struggle worthwhile. The moments that reminded her why she had chosen this path when an easier one was available. She did not think about Marcus often. Could not afford to spend energy on anger when survival required all her focus. But sometimes, late at night after Sophie was asleep, she allowed herself to remember. The way he had touched her face before suggesting she eliminate their child. The clinical way he had threatened her family. The complete absence of doubt in his voice when he assumed his money would solve everything. She wondered sometimes if he thought about her. If he ever lay awake wondering what had happened to the woman who disappeared rather than obey him. If he understood, even dimly, that his cruelty had created something he would never be able to control. Then Sophie would cry out in her sleep, or the morning would come with its endless demands, and Vivian would set aside her wonderings and return to the work of building a life. Meanwhile, Marcus Ashford was learning that success built on borrowed talent eventually collapses. His company had thrived in the years since his wedding, at least on paper. The merger with Victoria's family brought new opportunities and expanded markets. His name appeared in business journals. He spoke at conferences where younger executives hung on his every word. He had everything a man was supposed to want. But something had changed since Vivian left. Something he could not quite identify or explain. His strategies felt less innovative. His decisions seemed slower, less confident. The business insights that had once come easily now required enormous effort, and even then they often missed the mark. He did not understand, because he had never allowed himself to understand, that Vivian had been more than his assistant. She had been his strategic partner, his sounding board. The person who took his half-formed ideas and shaped them into actionable plans. She had done this quietly, invisibly, in a way that let him believe the brilliance was his own. Without her, he was exposed. Not immediately, not dramatically, but gradually, year by year, his limitations became visible to those who knew how to look. Victoria noticed first. She made comments during dinner parties about his recent decisions. Asked pointed questions about deals that should have closed but hadn't. Began excluding him from conversations with her father about the company's direction. The board noticed next. His contract extension had been approved, but the enthusiasm was muted. The expansion budget was quietly reduced. Performance metrics that had once exceeded expectations now merely met them, and even that required creative accounting. Marcus told himself the market was difficult. Told himself competition had increased. Told himself any CEO would struggle under these conditions. He never considered that his best years had been built on someone else's foundation, and that foundation had walked away with his blood money and his child. He was 3 years into his hollow marriage when the dreams started. He would see Vivian in his sleep. Not the Vivian who had stood trembling in his office accepting his check, but a different version. Confident. Powerful. Surrounded by success he could not touch. In these dreams she never spoke to him. Never acknowledged his presence. She simply existed in a world he was not part of, a world he had lost the right to enter. He woke from these dreams unsettled in ways he could not explain. Reached for Victoria in the darkness only to remember they had not shared a bed in 2 years. Stood at windows watching the city lights and wondering if Vivian was somewhere out there, or if she had truly disappeared as completely as it seemed. He could have searched for her. Could have hired investigators. Could have used his resources to find answers to questions that haunted him. But some part of Marcus was afraid of what he might discover. Afraid that the truth would be worse than uncertainty. Afraid that knowing would force him to confront things about himself he preferred to leave buried. So he did nothing. Let years pass. Let his marriage grow colder and his company grow weaker and his life grow emptier. Told himself he had made the right choice because any other conclusion was unbearable. Sophie was 18 months old when the letter arrived. Vivian was working the lunch shift at the diner, her daughter sleeping in a portable crib in the back room where the other waitresses took turns checking on her. The mail came as it always did, bills and advertisements and nothing important, except for one envelope that looked different from the others. It was from a law firm in New York. An address that made Vivian's hands shake because New York meant Marcus, meant the Langleys, meant danger she had spent 18 months trying to escape. She almost threw it away unopened. Almost decided that nothing good could come from that city. But something made her pause. Something made her carry the envelope home and wait until Sophie was asleep before slicing it open with trembling fingers. The letter inside changed everything. It was not from Marcus. It was not from the Langleys. It was from attorneys representing the estate of a man named Robert Mercer. Vivian read the name 3 times before understanding hit her with the force of a physical blow. Robert Mercer. Her grandmother's brother. The great-uncle she had never met because he had left the family decades before she was born. The one her grandmother rarely mentioned except in vague references to old arguments and unhealed wounds. He had died 2 years ago, the letter explained. He had spent his final years trying to locate family members, trying to make amends for decades of absence. His lawyers had been searching for his niece's descendants ever since. They had found Vivian only because she was using her grandmother's maiden name. Only because she had accidentally created a trail that led back to the family Robert Mercer had been seeking. And Robert Mercer had been wealthy. Quietly, privately wealthy, in the way of men who built fortunes through patient investment rather than flashy entrepreneurship. He had left his entire estate to any surviving blood relatives. The lawyers informed Vivian that her inheritance was $2.3 million and a small commercial building in the coastal town where Robert had spent his final years. She read the letter 4 times. Then she set it down and walked to the window and stared at the night sky for a very long time. $2 million would not make her wealthy by the standards of Marcus Ashford's world. But it was enough to change everything. Enough to stop working double shifts. Enough to pursue the education she had always wanted. Enough to build something real instead of just surviving. She thought about Eleanor's words. About losing what was not worth keeping and finding what was worth everything. She thought about all the months she had spent angry at her circumstances, never considering that those circumstances might be leading somewhere she could not yet see. The next morning, she called the lawyers and began the process of claiming her inheritance. And she started to plan. Vivian did not use the money carelessly. She had learned too much about the cost of financial instability to waste this unexpected gift on temporary comfort. Instead, She approached her inheritance the way she had once approached Marcus Ashford's business problems. With analysis. With strategy. With patient determination. She enrolled in online business courses while Sophie napped. Studied finance and investment and entrepreneurship with the same intensity she had once brought to understanding the Ashford Holdings portfolio. She read books. Took notes. Built spreadsheets projecting various uses of her capital. Eleanor watched this transformation with quiet satisfaction. The old woman had been growing frailer over the past year, spending more time in the rocking chair by her window and less time behind the bakery counter. But her mind remained sharp, and she recognized what was happening to her young tenant. "You are not going to stay in this town forever," Eleanor said one evening. "I always knew you were passing through, even if you did not know it yourself." "I do not know where I am going," Vivian admitted. "I only know I want to build something. Something that cannot be taken away. Then build it." The old woman's voice was firm. "You have more in you than waitressing and piano lessons. I saw it the first day you walked into my bakery with those haunted eyes and that stubborn chin. You are meant for bigger things, Vivian Mercer. Or whatever your real name is." Vivian looked at her sharply. Eleanor smiled. "I am old, not stupid. You showed up out of nowhere, pregnant and terrified, using a name you were not used to answering to. You flinch whenever someone mentions New York. You check the street before you leave the building. A person does not act like that unless they are running from something powerful and dangerous." She paused. Let her words settle. "I do not need to know what you are running from. It is not my business. But I do need you to know that running will only get you so far. Eventually you will have to stop. Eventually you will have to stand and face whatever sent you fleeing. And when that day comes, you want to be strong enough to win." Vivian felt tears threatening. Blinked them back. "How did you become so wise?" "By being very foolish for a very long time." Eleanor laughed, a sound like dry leaves rustling. "Now go study your finance books. Let an old woman sleep." 3 months later, Eleanor died peacefully in that rocking chair by her window. Vivian found her in the morning, arranged as if she had simply decided to stop breathing in the middle of watching the sunrise. The lawyer who handled Eleanor's modest estate contacted Vivian with unexpected news. Eleanor had no living family. She had left everything to the young mother who reminded her what courage looks like. The everything was not much by some standards. The bakery building, which Eleanor owned outright. A few $1,000s in savings. Some jewelry that had belonged to Eleanor's mother. But to Vivian, who had received nothing from anyone for most of her life, it felt like being given the world. She named her daughter's middle name after Eleanor. Sophie Eleanor Mercer. A tribute to 2 women who had helped her survive, neither of whom she would ever see again. With her inheritance from Robert and her legacy from Eleanor, Vivian had enough capital to begin building in earnest. She converted Eleanor's building into small business incubator space, offering affordable rents to local entrepreneurs who needed a place to start. She studied their businesses, helped them with accounting and strategy, learned from their successes and failures. And she began to invest. Not wildly, not recklessly, but with the careful analytical approach she had developed while managing Marcus Ashford's schedule and, without him ever realizing it, contributing to his business strategy. She identified undervalued companies led by overlooked founders. Women. Minorities. People dismissed by traditional investors who could not see past their backgrounds to their potential. Her first major investment was a medical technology startup led by 2 female engineers who had been rejected by 17 venture capital firms before Vivian found them. Their product was brilliant. A diagnostic tool that could identify cardiac abnormalities with unprecedented accuracy. The traditional investors had passed because the founders did not fit their image of successful entrepreneurs. Vivian invested $800,000. Nearly a third of her total capital. The risk terrified her. But something about those 2 women, their determination in the face of dismissal, reminded her of herself. She chose to believe in them. 18 months later, the startup was acquired by a major pharmaceutical company for $50 million. Vivian's stake was suddenly worth $15 million. And she was no longer just surviving. She was building an empire. By the time Sophie was 3 years old, Vivian had established Mercer Capital Partners as a legitimate venture capital firm. She had a small team of analysts she had recruited from overlooked talent pools. She had a reputation for seeing potential where others saw only risk. She had a portfolio of investments that consistently outperformed the market. She also had a different relationship with her anger. For years she had buried her fury at Marcus Ashford beneath the demands of survival. There was no energy for revenge when every day required all her focus simply to keep going. But as her success grew, as her position strengthened, Vivian found herself with something she had not had before. Options. She could use her resources to destroy him. Could acquire his competitors. Could influence his board members. Could systematically dismantle everything he had built the way he had tried to systematically dismantle her. The temptation was powerful. Some nights she lay awake imagining his face when he realized what was happening. Imagining the moment when his certainty crumbled and he understood that the woman he had threatened was now the architect of his ruin. But she also thought about Sophie. About the person she wanted her daughter to become. About the example she wanted to set. About whether a life defined by revenge could ever truly be a life of freedom. She made a decision that surprised even herself. She would not pursue Marcus Ashford. She would not seek his destruction. She would focus instead on building something so successful that his opinion of her would become irrelevant. She would make her existence the revenge, not her actions. It was the harder choice. But Vivian had learned that harder choices often led to better places. Still, she could not help monitoring his situation. Her position gave her access to information about Ashford Holdings that the general public did not have. She tracked his company's declining performance. Noted his reduced influence on the board. Observed the gradual erosion of the empire he had threatened to protect at any cost. She did not cause his problems. Did not need to. Marcus Ashford was perfectly capable of destroying himself without any help from her. She simply watched. And waited. And continued building. Sophie started preschool the autumn she turned 4. She was a confident child, curious and kind, with her mother's determination and a warmth that seemed to come from somewhere Vivian could not identify. She made friends easily. Charmed her teachers. Showed an early aptitude for music that made Vivian wonder if some gifts skipped generations. Mercer Capital Partners had grown beyond anything Vivian had imagined. The firm now managed over $50 million in assets. Her investment returns had attracted attention from financial press and industry conferences. She was regularly asked to speak about her approach to identifying undervalued talent. She said yes to one of these invitations. A major business summit in the city where she had once been a nobody. The city where Marcus Ashford still worked in the tower she had fled 4 years earlier. It was time to stop running. She prepared for the conference with meticulous care. Chose a presentation that showcased her methodology without revealing too much about her personal history. Arranged for Sophie's nanny to accompany them so her daughter would be comfortable during the trip. Booked a hotel far from the neighborhoods Marcus frequented. But she could not control everything. She could not predict who would attend her session. She could not know that Marcus Ashford, increasingly irrelevant in his own company, had been sent to this conference by a board that hoped public appearances might compensate for declining performance. She could not know that in just a few hours, the man who had ordered her to eliminate their child would come face to face with the daughter he did not know existed. The conference hall was enormous. State-of-the-art presentation facilities and seating for 3,000 attendees. Vivian arrived early, reviewed her slides, spoke briefly with the moderator about timing and logistics. She felt confident. The months of preparation had done their work. She knew her material. Knew her worth. Knew that the woman walking onto that stage bore no resemblance to the trembling assistant who had accepted a check and an ultimatum in a corner office 4 years ago. The moderator introduced her. Applause rose from the audience. Vivian walked into the lights and began to speak. She was halfway through her presentation, explaining her framework for evaluating overlooked founders, when she saw him. Marcus Ashford was sitting in the 12th row, his phone forgotten in his hand, his face holding an expression she had never seen before. Recognition. Shock. Disbelief. He was staring at her like she was a ghost, like the floor had opened beneath his feet, like everything he believed about the world had suddenly been proven wrong. Vivian did not falter. Did not pause. Did not give any indication that his presence affected her at all. She continued her presentation with the same calm authority she had been displaying before she noticed him. Finished her remarks. answered questions from the audience, received a standing ovation that lasted nearly 3 minutes. When she walked off stage, she could feel his eyes following her, could feel his desperation to reach her, to speak with her, to understand how this transformation had happened. She did not give him the chance. Her assistant was waiting in the wings with Sophie and the nanny. Vivian gathered her daughter and her team and began moving toward the exit, away from the stage, away from the man who was even now pushing through the crowd trying to reach her. But conference centers are large, and Marcus was determined. He caught up to them in a corridor near the speaker's lounge, his breathing ragged from moving too fast, his expensive suit rumpled from pushing through crowds. Vivian saw him approach, positioned herself between Marcus and Sophie with the instinct of a mother protecting her child. Her expression shifted from the confident executive who had commanded the stage to something colder, something harder. "Mr. Ashford." Her voice was professionally neutral. "I did not realize you would be attending this summit." He could not form words. His throat closed around all the questions that demanded answers. His eyes moved past her to the small figure partially hidden behind her legs. Dark curls. 4 years old. Features he recognized from his own childhood photographs. When he finally managed to speak, his voice came out rough and unfamiliar. "You kept her." "I kept my daughter." Vivian corrected each word carefully enunciated. "She has nothing to do with you. She has my eyes. She has her own eyes." Vivian replied. "Her own life. One you are not part of and never will be. Now if you will excuse me, I have a flight to catch." She turned to leave, and Marcus's hand shot out, catching her wrist the way he had that last night in his office. But Vivian jerked away from him with such force that several people turned to stare. "Do not," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that cut deeper than any scream. "Do not touch me. Do not speak to me. Do not pretend you have any right to know anything about my life. You made your choice 4 years ago when you handed me that money and threatened my family. I made mine when I decided we deserved better than your cruelty." "Vivian, please." He started. But she was already walking away. Already gathering her daughter and her team. Already disappearing through an exit that led to the parking garage. Marcus stood frozen in that corridor, aware of curious eyes on him. Aware that his world had just shifted on its axis in ways he could not begin to process. She had kept their daughter. She had vanished with his child and rebuilt herself into something powerful and untouchable. She had survived him. Thrived despite him. And looking at her now was like staring at the sun after years in darkness. He made it back to his car before the shaking started. Before the full weight of what he had lost crashed down on him with devastating clarity. He sat in the driver's seat with his hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to breathe through the realization that somewhere in the world was a little girl who carried his features and would never know his name. Unless he could find a way to change that. Unless he could somehow undo 4 years of absence and cruelty and become the father he had refused to be. Unless Vivian allowed him into her life again. But Marcus was beginning to understand, with horrible clarity, that some choices cannot be unmade. Some damage cannot be repaired. Some doors, once closed, stay closed forever. And as he sat in that parking garage watching Vivian's car disappear into traffic, taking his daughter farther and farther away, Marcus Ashford realized that this might be one of them. Marcus Ashford's obsession began the night he returned from the conference. He did not go home to Victoria. Did not attend the dinner meeting he had scheduled. Did not answer the 17 messages accumulating on his phone from board members and assistants and a wife who had long since stopped expecting his attention. Instead he drove to his office. Sat in the darkness of the corner where he had once handed Vivian $75,000 and told her to eliminate their child. Stared at the mahogany desk that still held the same polish, the same weight, the same indifference to the decisions made across its surface. She had kept the baby. The words repeated in his mind like a phrase from a song he could not stop hearing. She had kept the baby. She had disappeared with his child. She had rebuilt herself into something powerful and successful while he slowly crumbled inside a marriage that felt more like a prison with each passing year. He needed to understand how this had happened. Needed to trace the path from the trembling woman who had accepted his check to the commanding executive who had held 3,000 people in the palm of her hand. Needed to know everything about the life she had built without him. By morning he had made the calls. Hired the investigators. set in motion the kind of comprehensive surveillance that his resources made possible and his conscience should have made unthinkable. The reports began arriving within days. Thick folders that Marcus read in his office with the door locked and his phone silenced. Each page revealed another layer of the extraordinary transformation Vivian had accomplished while he lived his hollow existence. She had disappeared completely after leaving his office that night. Used his money to buy a bus ticket under her grandmother's maiden name. Traveled for 2 days, changing buses in towns whose names she had probably forgotten, until she reached a small coastal town 3 states away where nobody knew her face or recognized his name. The investigators had traced her movements through credit card records and hospital bills and the small paper trail that even the most careful fugitive leaves behind. They documented her pregnancy in sparse clinical terms. The birth of a daughter she named Sophie. The months of surviving on his blood money while working as a waitress in a diner where the owner did not ask questions. But something had happened that Marcus could not have anticipated. An inheritance from a great uncle she had never met. A dying woman who left her a building and a blessing. A series of investments that turned modest capital into significant wealth. The reports detailed her rise with the precision of an auditor documenting a hostile takeover. The startup investments. The venture capital firm. The reputation she had built for identifying overlooked talent. By the time Sophie turned 3, Vivian had become one of the most successful young investors in her sector. Marcus learned all of this through pages that felt like evidence of his own prosecution. Learned that Vivian had not been handed an empire but had fought for every inch of her success. Her inheritance gave her a starting point, but everything after that was earned through intelligence and determination and willingness to bet on herself when nobody else would. The $75,000 he had given her to solve his problem had become seed capital for her education and her first major investment. The foundation stone of an empire that now dwarfed his own achievements. But what devastated Marcus more than her financial success was learning about the cost of that success. The investigators had found hospital records from the night Vivian disappeared. Emergency room intake forms describing a young woman found unconscious in her apartment by a neighbor who heard screaming. Documented head trauma and defensive wounds consistent with physical assault. Notes confirming she was 12 weeks pregnant and terrified when she regained consciousness. Marcus read these clinical descriptions with growing horror. She had not simply left. She had been attacked, beaten, hospitalized with injuries that could have killed both her and their unborn child. And the timing. The night after he gave her the ultimatum. The night after he threatened her family. He had not ordered this violence. Had not known it was happening. But he had created all the conditions for it. Had made his threat so convincingly that someone decided to ensure compliance through methods more direct than money. Someone from Victoria's family. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. Daniel Langley. Victoria's brother. The man who handled problems too complicated for public solutions. Marcus had seen him at family dinners, at board meetings, at the wedding where Marcus had stood at the altar believing his problems were solved. Daniel had visited Vivian that night. Daniel had beaten her unconscious. Daniel had tried to ensure that the Langley family's investment in Marcus Ashford was protected at any cost. And Marcus had spent 4 years not knowing. For years telling himself that Vivian had simply taken his money and complied with his demands. For years avoiding the truth because avoiding the truth was easier than confronting the monster he had become. He found the photograph near the bottom of the final folder. Vivian at what appeared to be Sophie's 3rd birthday party. Laughing at something their daughter had said. Her face holding genuine joy that made her look younger and more carefree than Marcus had ever seen her. But if you looked closely, you could see the exhaustion around her eyes. Could see the weight she carried of someone who had built something magnificent while also carrying trauma that never fully healed. She had won. But winning had required sacrifices that no person should have to make alone. Marcus closed the folder and stared at the wall of his office for a very long time. He was beginning to understand something that changed everything he thought he knew about himself. He was not the protagonist of this story. Not the man trying to make amends for past mistakes. He was the villain. Pure and simple. And villains did not get redemption just because they finally recognized the scope of their crimes. Victoria found him in his office late that night. Still staring at photographs of Vivian and Sophie on his computer screen. Still processing revelations that had dismantled every justification he had ever constructed. She stood in the doorway wearing silk pajamas and an expression of cold calculation that Marcus had once mistaken for sophistication. "Who is she?" Victoria's voice held no curiosity, only the flat demand of someone who already suspected the answer. Marcus considered lying, considered protecting the fiction of their marriage a little longer. But he found he lacked the energy for pretense anymore. "Someone I knew before we got married," he said. "Someone I destroyed who rebuilt herself into something extraordinary." Victoria moved into the room. Her eyes scanned the papers scattered across his desk. The investigation reports he had been too careless to hide. She picked up one of the photographs, studied Sophie's face with the analytical precision she applied to quarterly earnings reports. "That is your daughter. Not a question. A statement of fact. You had a child with another woman and never told me. It is complicated." Victoria cut him off with a laugh that held no warmth. "Everything with you is complicated. I knew you were in love with someone else when we got married. I saw it in your eyes at the altar. That distance. That hollow space where real feeling should have been. But I told myself it did not matter because we were building something bigger than romance. Something that would last longer than passion. I was clearly wrong about that." Marcus stood, tried to find words that might bridge the chasm between them. "I do not need explanations." Victoria held up her hand. "I need to know if you are planning to leave me for her. If you are going to destroy our arrangement because you cannot stop obsessing over the woman who got away. My family's board votes keep your company stable. Without them you are vulnerable to the takeover attempts you have been fighting. So tell me now if you are about to do something spectacularly stupid." "She does not want me," Marcus admitted. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. "She has moved on. Built a life I have no part in. She made that very clear. But you cannot let it go." Victoria observed with clinical accuracy. "You are going to keep pushing. Keep investigating. Keep trying to force your way into their lives until you destroy everything we have built together. I can see it happening already. The way you are distracted in meetings. The way you disappear for hours without explanation. You are becoming a liability to everything we have constructed." She was right. They both knew it. Over the following weeks, Marcus engineered situations that put him in Vivian's professional orbit. Accepted speaking engagements at conferences where he knew she would be presenting. Arranged meetings with companies where her venture capital firm held major stakes. Each encounter was brief and professionally distant. Vivian treated him with the polite indifference she would show any business acquaintance she barely remembered. Never gave him an opening to discuss anything personal. Never showed any sign that his presence affected her at all. He watched her navigate boardrooms with lethal grace. Watched her dismantle weak arguments with precise logic. Watched her command respect in spaces that should have been intimidating but instead seemed almost dull compared to her overwhelming presence. The woman he had known as his assistant was gone. In her place was someone who had learned to build power rather than borrow it. Someone who needed nothing from him and wanted even less. What Marcus did not realize, what he could not see through his obsessive focus on understanding her success, was that Vivian was watching him back. Studying his weaknesses with the same strategic mind that had built her empire. Waiting for the perfect moment to demonstrate exactly what happened to men who thought their power made them untouchable. The business meeting happened because Marcus forced it through channels that left Vivian no professional way to refuse. His company was facing a hostile takeover attempt from a European conglomerate that smelled blood in the water. The Langley family's board seats were no longer enough to protect him. His performance had declined too visibly. His strategic decisions had failed too publicly. He needed outside investment to survive. And Vivian's venture capital firm controlled exactly the kind of resources that could either save him or let him drown. The irony was not lost on Marcus. He was now begging for help from the woman he had once threatened with casual cruelty. The power dynamics had inverted so completely that he was the one approaching with his hat in his hand, asking for mercy from someone who had every reason to deny him. The meeting took place in a neutral conference room at a downtown hotel. Sterile space designed for negotiations that required no personal connection. Vivian arrived exactly on time with two associates flanking her like bodyguards. Their presence made it clear this would be strictly professional. She wore a navy suit that cost more than Marcus's first car. Her hair was pulled back in a style that emphasized the sharp angles of her face. Her expression revealed nothing except mild professional interest in the financial projections his team had prepared with desperate care. She listened to his pitch with focused attention, asked pointed questions about his company's vulnerabilities, inquired about the specific threats posed by the takeover attempt, demanded details about his contingency plans if traditional financing fell through. When he finished his presentation, she sat back in her chair and studied him with eyes that seemed to see through every defense he had ever constructed. "Your numbers are solid," Vivian said finally. Her voice carried none of the warmth he remembered from their stolen moments together. "Your growth trajectory is genuinely impressive despite the current pressure. And your market position remains defensible if properly supported. But I need to understand something before my firm commits resources to your survival." She paused. Let silence fill the space between them. "Why should I help you, Marcus? Why should I provide you with a lifeline when you spent 4 years not caring whether your daughter and I were alive or dead?" Her associates shifted uncomfortably at the sudden personal turn. But Vivian kept her eyes locked on Marcus with unwavering intensity. He had prepared for tough financial questions, had rehearsed responses to concerns about market volatility. But her directness about their past stripped away all his careful preparation and left him exposed. "Because this is business," he managed. His voice sounded weak even to his own ears. "Because your firm makes money by identifying strong investments, and my company represents exactly that kind of opportunity." "Business," Vivian repeated slowly. Something like dark amusement flickered across her features. "You think you can separate what happened between us from a financial transaction? You think I can look at your projections without seeing you shove that envelope across your desk and tell me to fix my mistake? You believe I have forgotten how you threatened my mother's job, my brother's livelihood, everything my family had worked their entire lives to build." Marcus felt his associates tense beside him, felt their confusion as pieces of a story they had never heard clicked into uncomfortable place. He should have come to this meeting alone. Should have anticipated that Vivian would use this opportunity to expose him. "That was 4 years ago," he said quietly. "I was a different person then, operating from fear and selfishness. I made choices I deeply regret." "Regret is easy." Vivian leaned forward. Her voice dropped to something more intimate and therefore more cutting. "Regret costs you nothing. It is just a feeling you experience privately while the people you hurt deal with actual consequences. But you know what was hard? Leaving the only city I had ever known while pregnant and terrified. Watching my savings disappear while I tried to figure out how to survive. Wondering every day if you would follow through on your threats and destroy my family just because you could." She paused. Let him see the full weight of what she was about to say. "You know what required actual strength? Waking up in a hospital bed after your fiancé's brother broke into my apartment and beat me unconscious. Realizing in that moment that keeping my daughter meant accepting I could never come back here. Could never see my own family safely. Could never build the life I had planned for myself." The words hit Marcus like physical blows, each revelation cracking open his understanding of what had actually happened. He had assumed she left willingly, had taken his money and solved the problem exactly as he demanded. The possibility that Victoria's family had actively and violently attacked her, that she had been hospitalized with injuries sustained while trying to protect his child, that she had suffered physical trauma on top of the emotional cruelty he had inflicted. "What are you talking about?" His voice came out barely above a whisper. "What actually happened that night?" Vivian's smile held no warmth, only bitter acknowledgement of how little he knew about the consequences of his own choices. "The night I left your office with your money, I went home and started packing. I was planning to disappear quietly, to spare my family from your threatened retaliation. But Daniel Langley showed up at my apartment before I could finish. He had a different message about how complications should be handled." She paused. Her voice remained steady despite the pain underlying each word. "When I tried to run from him, when I tried to lock myself in my bedroom and call for help, he made absolutely sure I understood how serious his family was about protecting their investment in your future." Marcus felt the room tilt sideways, felt every carefully constructed justification for his past behavior crumble into worthless dust. He had told himself that giving Vivian money was generous under the circumstances, that threatening her family was simply protecting business interests, that she had made her own choices about what happened afterward. but hearing that Victoria's family had escalated his emotional cruelty into actual violence. That Vivian had been attacked and injured because of the situation he created. It made him confront for the first time the full scope of damage his cowardice had caused. "I did not know," he said, aware of how inadequate the words were. "I never told anyone to hurt you. I never wanted violence. But you created all the conditions where it could happen." Vivian replied, "You threatened my family directly. You made it clear that I had to disappear immediately. You painted me as an obstacle that needed eliminating. What exactly did you think would happen, Marcus? Did you imagine I would take your money and vanish peacefully? Did you consider for a single moment that your powerful fiancé's family might take additional steps?" She stood abruptly. Her associates rose smoothly with her. "I am not going to invest in your company. I am not going to save you from the consequences of building your empire on the backs of people you hurt. You want to survive this takeover. Figure it out the way I figured out how to survive you." Marcus stood as well, every muscle in his body tense with the need to stop her from leaving. "Vivian, please. Let me make this right somehow. Let me help you and Sophie now. Money. Resources. Connections. Anything you need. We do not need anything from you." Vivian gathered her materials with efficient movements. "I have more money than you will ever accumulate. I have a life you cannot touch. A daughter you will never know. The only thing you can give me is your complete absence from our lives. Stay away from us. Stop investigating my life. Accept that you destroyed something irreplaceable and move on." She walked toward the door. "Just tell me why," Marcus said. Desperation made his voice crack. "Why you kept her when you had every reason to do what I demanded. Help me understand." Vivian turned in the doorway. For just a moment her mask slipped enough to show the exhaustion that lived beneath her success. "I kept her because the moment the doctors told me I was pregnant, I loved her more than I had ever loved anything. I kept her because she deserved to exist regardless of what her father wanted. I kept her because even at my lowest point, lying in that hospital bed alone and terrified, I knew she would be worth every sacrifice." She paused. Her voice hardened. "And I did not come back here because you taught me the most important lesson I have ever learned. You taught me that some people genuinely do not deserve forgiveness. No matter how much time passes or how much they claim to have changed. Some bridges should stay burned forever." She left. Her associates followed. The door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded like a verdict. Marcus stood alone in that conference room with the ruins of his pitch scattered across expensive furniture. His own team filed out silently, their judgment obvious in the distance they maintained from their employer. That evening, Marcus drove to the hospital where Vivian said she had woken after Daniel's attack. Used his remaining connections to access medical records that confirmed every devastating detail of her story. The emergency room intake form described a young woman found unconscious. Documented significant head trauma. Defensive wounds consistent with assault. Noted that she was 12 weeks pregnant and terrified when she regained consciousness. The treating physician's notes mentioned her refusal to identify her attacker. Her insistence that she had fallen. Her discharge against medical advice early the following morning before anyone could ask questions. Reading those clinical descriptions of Vivian's pain. Seeing documented evidence of violence he had enabled. It made Marcus understand that he was not the protagonist trying to make amends. He was the villain. And villains did not get happy endings just because they finally recognized their crimes. He sat in his car in that hospital parking lot as darkness fell. Then he called Victoria. She answered on the third ring. Her voice carried the artificial brightness of someone at a social event. "Did you know?" Marcus asked without preamble. "Did you know what your brother did to Vivian?" The silence that followed told him everything before she spoke. "We were protecting our investment," Victoria said finally, all pretense gone from her tone. "You think I did not know about your secretary? I knew about your affair from the second month. I had you followed. Documented. I knew about every hotel room and every lie you told. But I did not care because you were useful to my family. We needed your company. Your reputation. Your heart and your fidelity were never part of our arrangement. Your brother assaulted a pregnant woman. Marcus's voice shook with rage he had not known he possessed. He broke into her apartment and hurt her badly enough that she woke up in a hospital. That is not protecting an investment. That is violence against an innocent person. He ensured a complication was handled efficiently. Victoria corrected. Her tone suggested she was discussing routine business rather than violence. Dominic has always been efficient at protecting our family's interests. The girl survived. She seems to have done quite well. I fail to see why you are developing a conscience about something that happened 4 years ago. Marcus felt something fundamental shift inside him. The last threads of his carefully maintained denial snapping under the weight of truth. His marriage was not just loveless. It was built on violence he had enabled. His company was not a testament to his abilities. It was evidence of how far he would go to avoid responsibility. I want a divorce, he said. The words emerged with clarity he had not felt in years. I want out of this marriage and everything connected to it. Victoria's laugh was sharp. Cutting. You will care very much when my family pulls our board votes and your company collapses. You will care when the takeover proceeds unopposed and you lose everything. But sure. Let us get divorced. Let us destroy your life because you cannot stop obsessing over a woman who wants nothing to do with you. My lawyers will be in touch. She hung up before he could respond. Marcus sat alone in darkness, understanding that the destruction of everything he had built was only beginning. Vivian's refusal to save his company was just the opening move. She had been watching him, studying him, waiting. She was going to systematically dismantle everything he had built. And unlike 4 years ago when she had no power to fight back, this time she held all the cards. The divorce and takeover happened with brutal efficiency over the following months. Victoria's lawyers moved with such speed that Marcus barely had time to hire adequate representation. The filing was coordinated perfectly with her family's announcement that they would sell their board holdings. Maximum chaos at the exact moment he was most vulnerable. Board members resigned citing personal reasons that fooled nobody. His company's stock plummeted. The European conglomerate increased their offer. His remaining executives updated their resumes on company time. Marcus's security team uncovered connections that explained the pattern of his collapse. Financial trails leading to shell companies controlled by Vivian's firm. Strategic investments in his competitors designed to steal market share. Quiet meetings between Vivian and his former board members before they resigned. She was not simply refusing to help him. She was orchestrating his downfall with the same strategic brilliance she had applied to building her empire. The takeover proceeded toward completion. His board voted to accept the final offer. Marcus was offered a consulting position in the merged company. A token gesture everyone understood was just a way to ease him out. On his last day as CEO, he cleaned out his office alone. Packed awards and photographs that felt like evidence of someone he used to be. Left his badge on the reception desk and walked out into a parking garage that reminded him of the night Vivian had disappeared. The destruction was complete. And he had no one to blame except himself. Marcus hit bottom on an afternoon 6 months later. He was standing outside Sophie's preschool, watching parents collect their children, waiting for a glimpse of the daughter who did not know he existed. He had sworn to himself he would not do this. Had told himself that respecting Vivian's boundaries meant accepting permanent distance from Sophie. But months of losing everything had eroded his judgment. His ethics. His basic sense of what was acceptable. He had memorized the school's address from the security reports. Had rented a car Vivian would not recognize. Had been watching for 3 weeks now. Learning Sophie's schedule. Her friends' names. The routines of her small life. He never approached. Never tried to make contact. Just watched from his car and collected pieces of her existence like a desperate thief stealing scraps. Then one afternoon the nanny was delayed. Sophie waited alone on the school steps while teachers made worried phone calls. Marcus watched his daughter try to be brave. Saw her small shoulders stay straight even as her eyes scanned the parking lot for someone familiar. After 20 minutes of watching her wait alone, he got out of his car and crossed the street. The teacher looked up as he approached. Her body language shifted into protective mode. "I am sorry to interrupt," he said carefully. "I noticed that little girl has been waiting a while. Is everything all right?" Her regular pickup was delayed. The teacher said, Her tone made clear she would not share details with a stranger. "We have contacted her mother. Someone will be here shortly." Marcus nodded, started to walk away. But Sophie looked directly at him, and something in her face stopped him completely. She was not crying, but he could see tears threatening. Could see the effort it took to maintain composure. He found himself crouching down to her level despite the teacher's obvious discomfort. "Hey there," he said softly. "I know waiting is hard, but I bet your mom is on her way right now." "My nanny got sick," Sophie said. Her small voice carried a tremor she was trying to suppress. "Mama is in a meeting that cannot be interrupted. I'm supposed to be patient, but I do not like being the last one here." "Being patient is tough," Marcus agreed. "But you are doing a really excellent job. Not everyone can wait this calmly when they are worried. That takes genuine strength." Sophie studied him with intensity that reminded him of Vivian. "Do you have kids?" "No." The lie was necessary. "But I was a kid once. And I remember waiting for my mom feeling like the longest time in the world." Before Sophie could respond, a car screeched into the parking lot. Vivian emerged looking panicked and disheveled in a way Marcus had never seen. She ran toward the school with complete disregard for her expensive heels. When she saw Marcus crouched near her daughter, every muscle in her body went rigid. Her expression combined fury and terror in equal measure. "I was just leaving," Marcus said quickly. But Vivian was not listening. She moved past him to gather Sophie into her arms with fierce protectiveness. "Are you okay?" she asked Sophie, running her hands over the child as if checking for injuries. "Did he touch you? Did he say anything that made you uncomfortable?" "He was nice," Sophie said, confused by her mother's intensity. "He told me I was being patient while I waited for you." "Why are you so scared, Mama?" Vivian's eyes never left Marcus's face. "Do not," she whispered. The word cut deeper than any shout. "Do not touch me. Do not speak to me. Do not come near my daughter again. You have no right to be here. No right to know anything about her life. You lost that right when you tried to pay me to make her not exist." She gathered Sophie and the nanny who had just arrived. Disappeared through the parking lot exit without looking back. Marcus stood frozen on the sidewalk, aware of teachers staring at him, aware that he had crossed a line from which there was no return. The restraining order arrived 2 days later. Vivian's lawyer explained that any further contact with Sophie or proximity to places she frequented would result in immediate legal action. The order was temporary pending a hearing to determine if it should become permanent. Marcus did not contest it, could not defend himself. He had been stalking his daughter's preschool. There was no justification for that behavior. The restraining order was appropriate protection against the threat he represented. His brother called from across the country that evening. "You need to leave," his brother said with the bluntness of someone who loved him enough to tell hard truths. "Every day you stay in that city, every time you drive past places connected to them, you are just picking at wounds that need to heal. Maybe your presence in their lives is punishment for them rather than penance for you." The words lodged in Marcus's chest like shrapnel. He had convinced himself that suffering near Vivian and Sophie was appropriate punishment. But really he was making himself a constant threat they had to guard against. Leaving would be the first genuinely selfless thing he had done in years. He started making plans to relocate. Contacted headhunters about opportunities in other cities. Began dismantling the life where his greatest successes and most devastating failures had occurred. On his last night in the city, Marcus drove past Vivian's building one final time. Did not stop. Did not slow down. Just acknowledged that this was where his daughter lived and grew without him. He whispered something that might have been goodbye or apology toward the illuminated windows. Then continued driving until the building disappeared from his mirror. The next morning he packed his car with the few possessions that still mattered and started driving east toward a city where nobody knew his history. Where he could be anonymous. Irrelevant. No longer a danger to the people he had failed. It was not redemption. Barely qualified as basic decency. But it was the only thing he had left to offer. Vivian stood in her corner office 3 months after Marcus left the city, holding a contract that represented the final phase of a revenge campaign she had been orchestrating for years. The hostile takeover of Marcus's remaining company holdings sat on her desk awaiting signature. Her lawyers had structured it perfectly. A shell corporation that would acquire his last minority stake for pennies on the dollar, eliminating his final financial connection to the empire he had once controlled. She picked up her pen, positioned it above the signature line, and found her hand refusing to complete the motion. Her assistant knocked before entering. "The legal team is waiting for authorization. They need your signature before close of business. If we miss this window, his creditors might complete the acquisition first." "Let them," Vivian heard herself say, setting down the pen. "Call legal and tell them we are withdrawing the offer entirely." The assistant's surprise was visible but quickly controlled. She left to make the necessary calls. Vivian stood at her windows watching traffic flow through streets far below. Tiny cars carrying people toward lives that probably made more sense than hers did at this moment. She had spent so much energy on revenge, had devoted countless hours to dismantling Marcus's empire piece by piece, had found genuine satisfaction in each report showing her gains and his losses. But somewhere during her campaign to destroy him, she had lost sight of why she wanted destruction in the first place. The truth she had been avoiding was that revenge had not healed anything. Marcus losing his company did not undo the night Daniel attacked her, did not erase the years of hiding, did not give Sophie a father or Vivian back the version of herself who had believed in love. She had won every battle and still felt like she was losing the war. Her victories hollow because they were measured against someone else's destruction rather than her own reconstruction. That evening Vivian left work early for the first time in months. Picked up Sophie from school herself. Saw her daughter's face light up with surprised joy. They went to the park instead of going straight home. Sophie chatted about her friends and her drawing class and the book her teacher had read. Vivian pushed her on swings and helped her navigate the climbing structure and tried to be fully present rather than mentally reviewing strategies. When Sophie asked if they could get ice cream for dinner, Vivian said yes. They sat on a bench watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Sophie's small body pressed against her side with unself-conscious affection. "Mama," Sophie said thoughtfully, ice cream dotting her chin. "Are you feeling better now? You seemed sad for a long time, but today you seem like yourself again." Vivian felt tears threaten at her daughter's perceptiveness. She wrapped her arm around Sophie and kissed the top of her head. "I am feeling better. I was spending too much time thinking about things that happened a long time ago instead of paying attention to what is happening right now. But I am going to do better. I promise." "Good," Sophie said with satisfied finality. "Because right now is the best part of the day. Right now we have ice cream and the sky is pretty and you are here. Yesterday and tomorrow do not matter as much as right now." The wisdom in her daughter's simple observation made Vivian realize how much time she had wasted living in the past, planning revenge. Marcus had taken enough from her without also stealing the years she could have spent fully present in Sophie's childhood. Later that night, after Sophie was asleep, Vivian went through her files and deleted every document related to her revenge campaign. Cleared surveillance reports, financial analyses, photographs of Marcus looking increasingly destroyed. Looking at them now made her feel sick rather than satisfied. She spent the following weeks rebuilding her life around something other than vengeance. Reconnecting with friends she had neglected. Taking actual vacations where she left her work phone behind. Working with a therapist who gently pointed out that trauma required processing rather than projection. It was harder than expected to let go of anger that had been her constant companion for years. Harder to accept that Marcus's suffering had not actually healed her wounds. But slowly Vivian began to recognize herself again. Laughed more easily. Slept better. Noticed flowers blooming and small beautiful things that existed regardless of corporate warfare. Sophie responded to her mother's increased presence with joy that reminded Vivian of what she had been fighting to protect in the first place. Letting Marcus go did not mean forgiving him. It meant acknowledging that holding on to rage hurt her more than it hurt him. The emergency came on an ordinary afternoon 2 years later. Sophie collapsed during her dance recital. Her small body crumpled mid-pirouette while Vivian watched from the audience with her heart stopping before her mind could process what was happening. The ambulance arrived within minutes. Paramedics moved with practiced efficiency while Vivian tried to hold herself together. They stabilized Sophie and asked questions about medical history that suddenly seemed catastrophically incomplete. She knew Sophie's pediatric her vaccination schedule. But when they started asking about family genetic conditions, Vivian realized she only knew half of her daughter's medical story. They admitted Sophie to the pediatric intensive care unit. Her small form dwarfed by machines monitoring every vital sign. The attending physician was kind but direct. Sophie's collapse suggested a cardiac abnormality requiring immediate investigation. They needed complete family medical histories from both parents. Vivian sat beside her sleeping daughter and made a list of her own family's information. Then she confronted the unavoidable reality. She needed to contact Marcus. Her hands shook as she called her lawyer, explained the emergency, asked for guidance on suspending the restraining order for medical purposes. She had deleted all files on Marcus's whereabouts, had instructed her team to stop surveillance, had no idea how to reach him. The irony was bitter. She had spent years tracking his movements. Now when she actually needed him for their daughter's well-being, she had no way to make contact. She finally called his brother, explained the emergency, begged for Marcus's current phone number. The brother provided it with a warning that Marcus had been through hell and did not need further devastation. Vivian stared at the number for a full minute before finding courage to dial. When the line connected, she heard Marcus's cautious voice. "Hello. It is Sienna. She collapsed during dance class. She is in pediatric intensive care and the doctors need your complete medical history immediately. Can you help us?" Silence stretched long enough that Vivian thought the call had dropped. Then she heard his sharp intake of breath. "Is she okay? What happened? What hospital are you at?" Vivian provided clinical details. The cardiac abnormality, genetic testing, the immediate need for his family's medical information. She heard him moving. Heard him say he was leaving his office. Would be on the next available flight. "Send me your email. I will have my doctor forward my complete file within the hour." "And Vivian, I am not trying to intrude. I just want to help. I will stay away from you and Sophie if that is what you need. But please let me provide whatever information the doctors require. The restraining order does not matter right now," Vivian said. "Sophie needs help. You are her father regardless of our history. Just get the records to the hospital as fast as possible." She provided her email and the hospital's contact information, then returned to Sophie's bedside. Marcus's medical records arrived electronically within 40 minutes. A comprehensive file documenting his family's history of cardiac conditions, including the sudden death of his grandfather from an undiagnosed heart defect. The attending physician reviewed the information with visible relief. Knowing the genetic pattern helped them identify Sophie's specific condition and develop an appropriate treatment plan. The diagnosis was a congenital heart defect requiring surgery, treatable if addressed promptly. Vivian texted Marcus an update about the diagnosis and planned procedure. Kept her message clinical. Her phone rang immediately. "I am at the airport," Marcus said without preamble. "My flight boards in 20 minutes. I know I do not have the right to be there, but I found the top pediatric cardiac surgeon in the country, Dr. Amelia Chen. She is consulting in Boston, but she is willing to fly out tomorrow to evaluate Sophie if you authorize it. She pioneered the specific surgical technique your daughter needs." Vivian felt something shift in her understanding of who Marcus had become. "How did you find her?" "I called everyone I used to know with medical connections. Explained the situation and asked who was the absolute best regardless of cost. Her name came up 3 times. "Okay," Vivian said. "Too tired to maintain walls. Have her assistant contact the hospital directly. And Marcus, thank you for the records and the specialist. That matters." She heard his breath catch. "I will stay in the hospital waiting room once I arrive. I will not approach Sophie unless you give permission. I just need to be nearby in case the doctors have questions." Marcus arrived 6 hours later. Vivian knew the moment he entered because her phone buzzed with a text saying he was in the waiting room. Sometime around midnight she found herself walking down to where he sat alone in a corner, his head in his hands, looking nothing like the powerful CEO who had once handed her money and ultimatums. They stared at each other across the sterile waiting room. All practice speeches evaporated in the face of shared terror for their daughter. She is stable, Vivian said quietly. The surgical team is preparing for the operation tomorrow. Marcus stood but made no move to approach. Is there anything I can do? You already helped. The specialist you found is consulting on her case. Your medical records gave them critical information. You have done everything a father could do. The word father hung between them. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. Can I see her? Just for a minute. I will not wake her. Vivian should have said no. But standing in that waiting room watching Marcus barely hold himself together, she could not deny him this. 5 minutes. But if she wakes up, you leave immediately. She led him to the pediatric unit. Signed him in as immediate family. Then stood by the door while Marcus approached Sophie's bedside with cautious reverence. He looked at their daughter for a long moment, taking in her small face. The machines tracking her vital signs. The fragility of someone who had been perfectly healthy hours ago. When the 5 minutes ended, Marcus thanked Vivian with his eyes and left without protest. She found him in the hallway afterward. His back against the wall. She is so small, he said. So fragile and perfect. How do you survive the fear of loving someone that much? You learn to live with terror. Vivian surprised herself by engaging. You accept that loving someone means being permanently vulnerable. And you decide the alternative is worse. They stood together in that corridor. Two people bound by a daughter and separated by history too painful to simply forget. Vivian's mother arrived the next morning. Embraced Vivian with fierce protectiveness. Then saw Marcus and positioned herself between them like a barrier. You have a lot of nerve showing up here, her mother said. Her voice low but sharp. After what you did. Marcus looked up with eyes holding no defensiveness. I do not have the right to be anywhere near them. I am only here because Sophie needed my records. If you want me to leave, I will. Vivian's mother studied him for a long moment. Whatever she saw made her expression soften slightly. She turned to Vivian, touched her daughter's face, and whispered that she would get coffee. When she returned with 3 cups instead of 2, she silently handed one to Marcus. The surgery lasted 7 hours. Marcus never left the waiting room. Made himself useful in small ways. Brought water. Asked about meal options. Moved his chair away when he sensed his proximity made Vivian uncomfortable. Never pushed for recognition. Just existed quietly in the margins. The surgeon emerged in late afternoon. Explained that the procedure had gone well. Sophie had tolerated the surgery better than expected. The defect was corrected. Their daughter should be able to live a completely normal life. Vivian felt her legs go weak with relief. Her mother caught her elbow. Marcus stood but maintained distance. His face showing the same overwhelming relief. They were allowed to see Sophie an hour later. She was still unconscious. Her small chest rising and falling with the ventilator. Seeing her daughter so vulnerable made Vivian's composure crack. She sank into the chair beside the bed and wept. When she regained control, she looked up to find Marcus still there. Tears tracking down his face. He was not looking at her but at Sophie. You can come closer, she heard herself say. You flew across the country. You might as well see her properly. Marcus approached slowly. Stopped on the opposite side of the bed. His hands gripping the rail. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for letting me be here. You are her father, Vivian said. Whatever happened between us, she carries your genetics. You had a right to know she was in danger. They stood on opposite sides of their daughter's bed. Two people connected by this small person who did not yet know the complicated history that surrounded her existence. Sophie woke fully on the 3rd day. Confused but alive. She asked questions with characteristic directness, and Vivian explained that the doctors had fixed something in her heart. Sophie accepted this with resilience. More interested in cartoons than medical details. Marcus was there during one of her waking periods. Standing near the window. When Sophie noticed him, she tilted her head with recognition. You are the nice man from school, she said. The one who said I was being patient. That is right, Marcus said carefully. I came to check on how you are doing. My heart was broken. Sophie agreed matter-of-factly. But the doctors fixed it. Mama says I will be able to dance again. That is wonderful, Marcus said, fighting to maintain composure. I am glad the doctors could help you. You are very brave. I was not brave during the surgery, Sophie said seriously. I was asleep. Being brave is when you are scared but you do the thing anyway. The observation made both Marcus and Vivian smile. Sophie asked if Marcus was a friend of her mother's. Vivian found herself answering honestly that he was someone she used to know. That he had helped when Sophie got sick. After Sophie drifted back to sleep, Marcus approached Vivian. I should probably head back east soon. I just wanted to know if it would be okay to leave my contact information. Not to push for involvement, but in case there is another medical emergency. Vivian considered refusing, but found she could not deny that access to his information might be important. Okay. Leave your information with the hospital administrators. And Marcus, thank you for being here this week. His eyes filled with tears he did not try to hide. The next morning Vivian found he had checked out and returned to wherever he now lived, leaving behind medical documents and a note thanking the nursing staff for their care. Sophie's recovery progressed faster than expected. Within 2 weeks she was home complaining about activity restrictions. Within a month she was back at dance class, carefully monitored but determined to resume her normal life. Vivian found herself thinking about Marcus more than expected, wondering how he was processing having met his daughter so briefly. She did not contact him, but she kept his information in her phone, an acknowledgement that some connections could not be completely severed. And late at night, when Sophie was sleeping peacefully, Vivian allowed herself to consider the possibility that people could change. That maybe someday there could be space for Marcus to know his daughter in ways that did not damage anyone. It was not forgiveness. Not yet and possibly never. But it was the first softening. The first recognition that the future did not have to be dictated entirely by the past. 3 years passed. Sophie grew into a confident child. Healthy and thriving. She asked about her father occasionally. The careful probing questions of a child trying to understand her origins. Vivian answered truthfully but without embellishment. Her father was a man who had made choices that prevented him from being part of their lives. Those choices were his to live with. Sophie accepted this with the practical wisdom of children who grow up secure in available love rather than grieving love that was withheld. Vivian received word through her attorney that Marcus had suffered a stroke. He was in a care facility now. Speech impaired. His days of any kind of professional life finished. His former colleagues had largely forgotten him. She did not visit. Did not send flowers or cards. But she found herself one evening playing piano. A piece from years ago, before everything changed. Sophie was 10 now. A cellist with her grandfather's talent and her mother's ear for structure. She appeared in the doorway. Cello case in hand. Mom. I am heading to rehearsal. You okay? Vivian stopped playing. Looked at her daughter. The dark hair she had inherited from her grandmother. The determined jaw that was entirely her own. The quiet confidence of someone who had never been made to feel she was a problem requiring elimination. I am fine, she said. I was just remembering something. Something sad. Something finished. Vivian closed the piano. Something that does not require any more attention than I have already given it. Sophie nodded, accepting this as she accepted most of her mother's occasional distances, as private territory that would be shared when the time was right. After Sophie left, Vivian sat in the quiet of her home, listening to ordinary sounds of the street outside. The life she had built from wreckage and will. Marcus was fading somewhere surrounded by strangers who did not know his history. His punishment had come not through her vengeance but through natural consequences of building a life on cruelty and cowardice. She had not destroyed him. Had simply outlasted him. Outgrown him. Built something he could never touch while he watched his borrowed life crumble. The greatest justice, Vivian understood now, was not his suffering but her indifference to it. He had become irrelevant in every way that mattered. A footnote in the story of her emergence. A shadow that had once seemed threatening and now seemed merely small. She turned off the lights and went upstairs. Her daughter's music still echoing in her mind. The future still unfolding with the same quiet persistence that had carried her through exile and fear and doubt. This was not forgiveness. This was not reconciliation. This was simply the final measure of a composition that had taken years to complete. The silence after the last note, where meaning lives without requiring further sound. Vivian slept peacefully that night, dreaming of music she had not yet written, carrying nothing of him into the morning. Some stories do not end with dramatic confrontation or tearful reconciliation. Some stories end with a woman closing a piano and going upstairs to bed, with a daughter practicing cello in a room full of light, with the quiet accumulation of days that matter more than any single moment of reckoning. Marcus Ashford had tried to pay $75,000 to make his daughter not exist. And now he would spend his remaining years in a facility where no one knew his name, while that daughter grew into someone remarkable, someone who would never doubt her worth, someone who would carry her mother's strength into a future her father would never see. That was the consequence. Not loud, not dramatic, just the quiet mathematics of choices made and prices paid. And somewhere in a house filled with music and warmth and the ordinary sounds of a life well lived, Vivian Mercer smiled in her sleep. She had won. Not by destroying him, but by becoming someone his destruction could never touch. That was enough. That was everything. The end.